So it feels like something epic is about to take place or something epic did take place. And the truth is that is true, right? It is epic what took place in Matthew's life. And so we are beginning a new series here at Trinity called Real People, Stories from the Chosen, for 4 weeks here at Trinity as we continue to do what God has called us to do to make disciples of Jesus. We're going to dig into the 4 Gospels, the 4 sermons that are written from 4 saints, St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke, and St. John. And today we're going to look at St. Matthew's message, his sermon, if you will, the Gospel of Matthew. And so we know this about Matthew. Right? He chose a career that pushed him away from his family, from his people. But yet Jesus chose him, very simply saying, "Come and follow me." And Matthew didn't hesitate, it seems, and he just followed Jesus. And he followed Jesus for 3 years, seeking to become like him, listening to every word that he said, watching every move that he did. And then for decades after that, Matthew continued to live out the teachings of Jesus, the command of Jesus, the mission of Jesus, as Matthew went out and made disciples of all nations. In fact, church fathers tell us that Matthew ended up thousands of miles away in Ethiopia making disciples of Jesus. And at some point in Matthew's longevity in making disciples, he decided to write a sermon, to write a message to his family back at home about Jesus and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And that's what we call the Gospel of Matthew. And what we do know also about Matthew is that he was told to stop making disciples, but he refused to stop making disciples because he knew the resurrected one was Jesus, and he couldn't help but proclaim the truth. And because of that, he was martyred for his faith. Right? This is Matthew. And what does it mean to be a disciple according to Matthew? Next week we'll dig into Mark. What is the unique aspect in that sermon about what it means to be a disciple? And then we'll look at Luke and John, but today it is Matthew. So we already heard the text read. We just saw the text again. But the significant statement where Jesus says, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and followed him. The chosen one chose Matthew, and then a huge statement. You got to figure out what this means and learn what this means. "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. "I have come to not call the righteous, those who think they have it all together, but I've come to call the sinners." Right? Matthew shares his origin story within his sermon. Matthew also shares this huge truth that we just heard sung about the truth of who Jesus is and this invitation that Jesus gives to all. In Matthew chapter 11, Verse 28, where Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, heavy laden, I will give you rest." Right? Take my yoke, take my teaching, take my purpose upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls if you take my teaching upon you. For my yoke, my teaching is easy, and my burden is light. And so the question is, what is Jesus' yoke? What is his teaching that he gave to Matthew, that Matthew shared in his sermon? I don't know how many of you have ever taken sermon notes. One of us pastors preach, but I would encourage you, read through Matthew's sermon this week. Take a couple weeks. It's 28 chapters away. It's divided up, not that long of a sermon. It's really not. It sounds like it is because it's 28 chapters, but it's not that long. Read it and take some sermon notes. That's what I did over the last couple of weeks. And what I couldn't help but see was this yoke that Matthew shared about being a disciple of Jesus is mercy. That's his yoke. That's the thread when you go through the Gospel of Matthew. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? Mercy is what it's all about. And you see this thread. You see forgiveness, which is the mark of mercy, given throughout. A lot of different marks of mercy, but certainly forgiveness, right? Lets us see the mercy of God. And so when you open up the Sermon of Matthew, you begin to see this genealogy. What is a genealogy? Why do we have a genealogy? The beauty of Matthew's genealogy of what led to the birth of Jesus all the way from Abraham is that Matthew includes all the bloodlines that were there. Not just Abraham's bloodline, but other bloodlines are coming in. Gentiles, non-Jewish individuals were in the bloodline of Jesus, not just non-Jewish individuals. But we see prostitutes, we see adulterers, we see murderers, all in the bloodline of Jesus. Why would Matthew tell us that? Because he wants his family, he wants us to know as disciples of Jesus that his blood purifies all, that his blood is merciful, his blood has come to forgive The Christmas account, the origin of Jesus, his birth, right? The angel shows up to Joseph in Matthew's gospel and says, Joseph, you got to name him Jesus. Why? Because he's going to save his people from their sins, because he is full of mercy. Don't miss this. Right? John the Baptist comes into Matthew's sermon proclaiming repentance because the merciful one is here. You got to repent. You got to change the way you think. You think God's like this? You think you need to act this way? Nope. Here he comes, and he is full of mercy. And then Matthew shares a Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount begins with the Beatitudes. There's 9 Beatitudes. And whether there's a listing of things in the Scriptures, the sermon writers were great sermon writers, and so they're emphasized in actually the middle of the 9. In the middle of the 9 Beatitudes is, blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy, right there in the Beatitudes. And then Matthew continues to share this sermon from Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, stop retaliating. You heard an eye for an eye. No more of that. That's not who I am. That's not my yoke. That's not my teaching. That's not what gives rest and peace. Turn the cheek. And in fact, Matthew shares what Jesus said about loving your enemies. Right? Love your enemies. That's what Jesus said. Be merciful to those that don't deserve mercy. That's the essence of mercy. Love your enemies. And then Matthew shares Jesus' teaching, the Lord's Prayer. We just prayed it. And right in the middle of the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And when Jesus teaches the Lord's Prayer in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus emphasizes that petition because this is the thread that Matthew wants us to know. Mercy manifested in the forgiveness of sins. Then as you continue to go through the Sermon on the Mount, you hear about judging not. Stop condemning people. There's a plank in your eye. Why are you worried about the sawdust in someone else's eye? Right? That's mercy. That's mercy. And then the calling of Matthew, where Jesus makes this clear statement, right? To learn what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Then right around there, Matthew shares with us a healing miracle that Jesus did. And Jesus did a lot of healing miracles because he has authority over all. He's God. He's the sovereign one. But Matthew in this sermon says this, because this is what Jesus said, so that you know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, so that you know my mercy is real. To the paralyzed man, get up and walk. You see him walking. The reason he's walking is because I'm merciful, because I'm here to forgive sins. In Matthew chapter 18, when you go through his sermon, you hear Peter come to Jesus. Jesus, how often am I supposed to give my brother mercy? How many times am I supposed to forgive him? What does Jesus say? Always. Mercy always, in his numbers that Jesus shares to help us understand it's unlimited. Stop counting. You just give it to him. That's what mercy is. And then Jesus has to have another conversation recorded for us in the Gospel of Matthew in his sermon with the same perhaps Pharisees that were there when he called Matthew a couple years later. You still don't get it. The tax collectors and sinners and adulterers are getting into heaven before you because you don't get mercy. And then a meal that we're about to have together, the mercy meal, the Lord's Supper, right? Matthew shares that in his sermon because he wants us to get this because he got it from Jesus, right? Mercy. Then Matthew shares the crucifixion of Jesus, where the mercy of God is on display, the forgiveness of God is on display, and what it costs him. And then Matthew does share with us that mercy wins every time when we see Jesus, the crucified one, the merciful one, rising from the dead and showing that mercy wins. Right? Mercy. The forgiveness of sins. Right? This is the mark that you see throughout his sermon. So I encourage you, take some sermon notes, read through the Gospel of Matthew. What I want to encourage you to do right now, because I want us not to miss this, is take some actual sermon notes from my sermon right now as we unpack Matthew's sermon. And so I don't know if you got the welcome bulletin or not, but there's 3 truths I want to share with you about mercy and being a disciple of Jesus as we see this in the forgiveness of sins. The first truth is this, and I don't want us to miss this, because Matthew didn't miss this in his own life, and he shared it over and over again. We are chosen by the forgiver. Matthew is chosen by the forgiver. We are chosen by the forgiver. We are chosen by the merciful one. He picked you. I don't know if you realize this. We say this a lot here, but let's not miss this. This is the gospel. This is why we call it the Gospel of Matthew, right? The gospel of Jesus, and we don't want to add to this, and so this is what it is. Right? You've been chosen. You've been chosen, you've been called. And many of us were baptized. If you haven't been baptized, get baptized. In our baptism, it's clear, heaven opens up and says, you are chosen by me, and I'm giving you mercy. Right? Some of you know that my wife and I, we have some dogs. We like to have puppies in our house. And oftentimes, this always happens, not oftentimes, every time someone comes to pick out a puppy over the years, I think 60 puppies we've given to people. Right? We got a little side business, in case you're wondering. Yes, there's puppies in our house every once in a while. But puppies, people come to pick out a puppy. How do you pick a puppy? A lot of people always say the puppy chose me. I don't understand how that fully works, but people come. There's 12 puppies, especially the first person to come, because none of the puppies have been picked. How do you pick the puppy? It's hard, right? They go up to the little puppy, they pull one out. Guess what all the other puppies are doing? Pick me, pick me. Their tails are wagging, they're barking, and I'm sitting there being a sympathetic one saying, I think that puppy likes you. You should play with that one. Oh, you know what? I think you should get 2. Or no, you should get 3, because 2 are better than 1. They need their sisters and brothers. How sad would that be? Look at their crying. Right? I share that just so we reflect on this. Right? He's chosen you. And he just didn't come to choose one person, one puppy, right? He's chosen us all. He's chosen us all, right? We're chosen by the forgiver. The doctor has come to heal, right? I like to share all these ailments that I have in my life, and so I'll share a new one for you. I've been doing P90X for some reason in my life. P90X is something that gets you doing a lot of different things. It gets you moving, twisting, to get all your muscles going, so I thought that was a good idea. And so I started doing these twisting plyometric plank things, and all of a sudden, something in my back didn't hurt. It's just like, man, if I could just grab that bone and just like twist it, I'd feel better. Something just felt wrong. And so I'm like, I should go to the chiropractor. Go to the chiropractor, takes an x-ray. Yes, you got a twisted vertebrae. We can fix that. But did you know that your neck had some traumatic injury to it at some point in your life? Your hips are out of whack. This vertebrae is a mess. This vertebrae is a mess. You're just a mess. But good news, because everybody's a mess like this. Why am I sharing this? Right? Because I think a lot of us, right, we need an x-ray taken. A lot of us struggle to know that we are a mess. Right? Maybe you've known that at some point, and maybe you feel like, I don't need someone to tell me that because I just know how of a mess I am. But there's a lot of us that need to hear that truth. We need an x-ray to be given to us, and thank God for His Word, because He shows us what a mess we actually are. Right? He didn't come for the righteous. He didn't come for the people that are perfectly aligned. He came for the broken, for those who need a doctor, right? That's you and me, right? And I don't want us to miss this, right? Jesus didn't want the Pharisees to miss this, because they were missing it. Right? And too often in our life, we think we're perfect, we think we're good enough. And if we think that, then we're missing this huge truth that we have been chosen by the forgiver, by the merciful one. And we didn't deserve that. Right? People don't deserve mercy. We don't deserve forgiveness, but He just chose us. He picked us. He showed up in our home and has brought spiritual healing and mercy and forgiveness. Second truth I want to share with you is this, is not just that we are chosen by the forgiver, but as those who have been chosen, we're called to choose Him. We need to choose the forgiver, choosing the forgiver. How often do we end up taking people for granted in our life? Do we have any married couples here? How many times has specifically your bride ever told the husband, you're taking me for granted again? All right, I'm not getting a lot of people agreeing with me right now, and that's okay, because I know it's true. Right? We take people for granted in our life. We think, hey, we're good. We're good. We don't need to work this out anymore. We're good. We're good. Right? What happens in our relationship with Jesus is, yeah, I needed mercy, but I'm good now. I'm good enough. You know what happens when we take Jesus for granted, the merciful one? We become like a Pharisee, and we start judging other people around us because we're not living in the daily truth that we need to choose Him over and over again, that He's choosing us over and over again. Right? Mercy isn't just a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing. Forgiveness isn't just a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing. Psalm 139, the psalmist proclaims this huge truth as he talks about life, and he says, God, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Before I was even conceived, you had a plan for me, and all the days of my life are marked by you. You have a plan for me. But in my days, Psalm 139 ends with this beautiful prayer. Test me, O God, test me. See if there are any anxious thoughts in me that are not of you, and then lead me in the way of everlasting life. Right? I love that prayer. Because that's a prayer where we're choosing the merciful one every day. Your mercies are new every morning. And God, show me the things that are destroying my life and the life of those around me. Show me those lies that I am believing in and that I'm putting on other people. Show me those things and help me. Give me mercy and lead me. Lead me in your truth, God. Gospel of Matthew. Matthew shares the startling moment where, yes, the chosen one has chosen Matthew and he's following Jesus, but all of a sudden there's a point in Jesus' ministry over Matthew where Matthew doesn't choose him. Right? Where Matthew says he deserted him. And there was a point in time where Matthew did not agree with mercy. Because the guard showed up in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus said in the Gospel of Matthew, recorded by Matthew, I could call down legions of angels right now and give this whole world justice right now. But I'm choosing to surrender. I'm choosing to give mercy. You know what Matthew did with that? They deserted Jesus. But the beauty of Jesus and the gospel of Jesus, the merciful one, is that 3 days later, Jesus showed up with Matthew and said, Matthew, I still choose you. Right? I know what just happened. I'm giving you mercy right now, Matthew. Disciples of Jesus, right? We are chosen by the merciful one, right? And we get to choose him every day. Choosing mercy every day. And the third truth that I want to share with you is this, is that disciples of Jesus choose to give forgiveness. Choose to be a forgiver. Choose to be one who gives mercy. So let's let this one settle in. Right? Jesus said, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You know what Jesus is saying there? Stop making people earn mercy. Stop making people sacrifice things to show you that they deserve your mercy. Stop making people earn forgiveness. I didn't make you do that, Matthew. I didn't make you do that. I gave you mercy. I gave you forgiveness. You don't need to earn this. Stop corrupting the gospel by the way that you share the gospel with others. This is the good news. And Jesus asks us to give that to others. Some of you are familiar with Karate Kid, Cobra Kai, more recently. Right? What's the motto of Cobra Kai? Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. Right? Mercy's for the weak. Right? That's the way of this world. That's not the way of Jesus. And Matthew shared us this truth very clearly. Right? That we are called to serve first, love hard, and always mercy. Always mercy. Always mercy. And so the question for us in this moment, and not just this moment, but every day of our life as disciples of Jesus, living in the thread of the gospel, who is it that God is calling you to give mercy to? Who is it that God is calling you to forgive? Disciples of Jesus have struggled with this. We continue to struggle with this. But yet we have this gospel that, yes, is given to us. Thank you, God, for your mercy. But this gospel that God has called us to share with the world. And so who is it? There's people in our lives every day where I try to make people personally, right? You got to earn my mercy today. Perhaps in the election time, right? You got to vote differently, and then I'll give you mercy. Then I'll forgive you. Is that really how mercy works? Is that how life works? Is that what it means to be a disciple of Jesus? It's mercy. Mercy is not for the weak. Right? Was Jesus weak? No. Right? In Jesus, we see that mercy wins every time. On that third day, mercy won, and it still wins. It will always win. Right? All Saints' Day is a day where we remember all those who have gone before us. In heaven. Why are they in heaven? Because mercy won and mercy wins. Right? And so the question, right, who is it that God is calling you to forgive? Who is it that God is calling you to give mercy to? In the statement from Jesus, verse 13, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. So we have a mercy meal. I don't know about you, but I need mercy, right? And so we're going to have a meal together because Jesus knew that we needed mercy as we let His truth sink into our hearts, into our lives.